Jana, alte Backers.
They were trying to prevent the town from expanding a 9-hole golf course on what they claim is ancestral land.
It's Mohawk land. It's our land. There's a little bit left. They're sucking the marrow out of our bones.
Provincial police in riot gear stormed the barricades the Mohawks had set up. There were clouds of tear gas, a hail of bullets, and in the midst of the battle, a policeman was killed.
The Mohawk warriors who had so often threatened armed resistance were simply herded ahead of the rolling armor.
What kind of people are you? There's children here and you're shooting tear gas at us.
Shoot! Get him out of here! Shoot!
In the early 16th century, Europeans started exploring Canada's eastern coast, beginning with John Cabot from England. Between 1534 and 1542, Jacques Cartier made 3 voyages across the Atlantic, claiming the land for King Francis I of France. Cartier had 2 captured guides speak the Iroquoian word Kanata, meaning village. By the 1550s, the name of Canada began appearing on maps. Parts of Canada were settled by France and parts by Great Britain. In 1605, Port Royal was built in Acadia by the French, led by Samuel de Champlain, and 3 years later, he started settling Quebec. The French and Aboriginal people collaborated in the vast fur trade economy, driven by the demand for beaver pelts in Europe. Outstanding leaders like Jean Talon, Bishop Laval, and Count Frontenac built a French empire in North America that reached from Hudson Bay to the Gulf of Mexico.
Now that we've seen a little bit about the Oka crisis and what happened exactly, as well as some of the history that led up to the Oka crisis, I'd like to talk a little bit about the groups that were involved. So one of the major groups that were involved was the Canadian Armed Forces, which were deployed following the dispute or resistance between Mohawk people of Ganasatake and the town of Oka, following the plans to develop a golf course on the land of Ganasatake, which belonged to the Mohawk people. Another group that was notably important, if not the most important to discuss, was the Mohawk people of Ganasatake. As the town of Oka was planning for an expansion of a golf course and development of townhouses on the land of the Ganasatake community near the town of Oka, the Mohawk protesters stood their ground against the Quebec police and the RCMP during a 78-day standoff until the Canadian Army was called in to end the standoff. The Mohawk community claimed the land and refused to have the town of Oka build a golf course over their land, which included a Mohawk burial ground. The third group to consider in this event was the media. There was a lot of media coverage on the Oka crisis, and for this reason it is very important for us to think about whose voices were heard and whose voices were silenced. Pauline Wakeham, an Indigenous Studies scholar who analyzed the event back in 2012, suggested that the media presented the Mohawk people as terrorists. She also argued that the war in the Middle East was going on at the same time as the Oka crisis, and that settler leaders such as Québécois separatist Jacques Parizeau were able to turn the view on the Mohawks into a similar view to that on the, air quote, terrorists in Iraq. Unfortunately, the media fed into the stereotype of dangerous Indigenous people and in turn lost sight of the cause for which the Indigenous activists were fighting. In addition, a 2010 editorial in the National Post suggested that an apology for what happened in the Oka crisis would, quote, simply reinforce Aboriginal leaders' tendency to wallow in the politics of victimhood, quote. A perfect example would be of how the police were portrayed as heroes fighting against violent indigenous people. This view was amplified when a Quebec police officer was unfortunately killed during a shootout, after which the tensions began to grow significantly. So I specifically decided to create my critical media product on the Oka crisis because I already knew quite a bit about it. Especially because I took a variety of Indigenous courses back in college. So I already knew that there were a lot of tensions back in 90 because the town of Oka was hoping to expand their golf course onto the land of Ganasatake, but I didn't know that they were also planning on developing townhouses. I knew that there were barricades. I didn't know that it lasted for that long. I didn't know that Indigenous people were portrayed so poorly in the media. And I most definitely did not know that the federal government purchased the land of Ganasatake afterwards and did not declare it as a reserve and did not formally declare it the land of the Mohawks. So I believe that my perspective on this event was quite different from that of society as a whole. I believe that a lot of people thought that the Oka crisis was, as it was portrayed, a disruption started by the Mohawk people of Ganasatake. A lot of people were very angry. I know that a lot of people were very angry at the time about the bridge being closed off, but I believe that with the knowledge that I had acquired from my Indigenous courses, I was able to see it from a different perspective where I was able to see that the Mohawk people were in fact victims of another attempt of colonialism and land theft. So the CMP challenged my thinking because prior to the CMP, I had not thought about the different perspectives. I had seen a lot of films from the Indigenous perspective, which had shown me a fair share of the injustices that were involved with the Oka crisis, but I hadn't seen much of the white settler perspective. I'd seen like very little bits and pieces, but not enough to be able to see it so clearly and see that it was in fact very, very unfair. And it wasn't only about what was going on the land of Ganasatake, but it was also about what people were thinking and how people were talking about the incident. So I think that my thinking was definitely challenged because I got to see beyond just the event. I got to see what the event entailed, how the event was used by white settlers to reinforce their actions.